Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Phia Group Empowering Plans webinar. I am your co-host, Adam Russo, and it's an exciting day. Happy fall to everybody. Today I woke up, Ron, and it was 35 degrees outside.
There's frost on the windshield.
There was snow on the back of my truck. Snow. I saw snow.
It begins.
So, but I still had a T-shirt on. I still wore my T-shirt. I am not going to change into any fall or winter clothing. I'm not going to give up. Folks, we're really excited about today. It is the largest audience we've ever had. I do not think that's a coincidence, Ron, that the minute we told people Brady Bizzarro is out, we have our largest audience ever. It doesn't even matter who the third chair is. Brady's out, biggest audience ever, by double.
By large audience, do you mean that these are the tallest people who have ever listened?
Biggest.
The
biggest and the best. It might have something to do with our topic, but I really don't think so. I think it doesn't matter what we would say. The minute they found out that Brady Bizzarro is not going to be on the webinar, I think it just helped us out. But, folks, today, obviously, there's a bunch of new people. You're all asking the same questions. Yes, these are recorded. Yes, it will be available on our website. It will be available on our website at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So at 2:30, feel free to go on our website and see it there.
But no, that doesn't mean you should hang up.
Right. Or if they want to hang up and get some work done, that's fine, Ron. I don't mind. I mean, we're getting paid either way. So anyways, specialty drugs, trends and issues affecting the self-funded plans. Folks, there's a lot of opportunities here, a lot of options. It's probably the number one issue that we see on a daily basis. So we wanted to make sure we get into it. In addition to tell you that the rest of the webinars that we're doing this year in November and December all will be focused on what's hot for 2019. We're going to do a two-part webinar, November, December, on things that we see trending, emerging issues, etc. for 2019. So let's get right into it and show you who our speakers are for today. As always, you have myself, the CEO and principal of the Phia Group, Adam Russo, with me. It's been how many years, Ron? How many years we've been doing this? I don't even know.
I can't keep count because it's more than my fingers.
It's at least 7-8 years we've been doing the webinars. Back in the day, it was Ron's wife, my mom, my sister would dial in, and that was pretty much it. They would actually not even dial in. They would just come to our office. But now, I want to make sure everyone says hello to Ron E. Peck. Say hello, Ron.
Hello, Ron.
Now, you're like, who is that? Everyone must be wondering, who is this Erin M. Hussey? Who is this attorney? What is she doing there? And where is Jen McCormick? Folks, Jen McCormick, lucky to say, I think last month's webinar, Jen McCormick just delivered the baby, right? Mm-hmm. So we can tell everyone she finally picked out a name. The name is the baby boy's name is Reed. Send in your comments and jokes later on. Feel free to email her directly at jmccormick@phiagroup.com. But we're very happy. Jen already came in the office with her child, and the first thing she did was gave the baby to someone else to take care of while she was here.
Hey, look, free daycare.
But I want to make sure we welcome Erin Hussey to our webinar. Hello, Erin.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Good evening and good night.
What is that? What was that? She's not following the proper
I'm just
script.
following Jen. Jen usually does that.
She is supposed to say, hello, Erin. I guess we're already getting emails from text from people telling us not to include Erin in future webinars because she doesn't follow the script. Folks, make sure that you follow us on LinkedIn. Just so everyone knows, on LinkedIn now, we actually have 3,016 followers as of 10 o'clock this morning, meaning Matt Payton has saved his job. 6 months late. But now we can actually bring Matt back to work here at Phia again. Please follow us there. Obviously, we have stories on there every single day. Matt and his team, which includes Hannah and a bunch of other people, they do an amazing job helping us from marketing, social media, all that stuff. If it wasn't for Matt and Hannah, we'd still have a webinar. It'd probably be just as good, but I don't know. We've got to say something nice about it. What do we say?
I don't. I think we used it up on our podcast. And actually, speaking of social media, it's a great place to catch our podcast, which we're posting all the time, and it's a great supplement for these webinars.
Right. Next, we want to make sure people are aware of Phia certification. Folks, we already have 20 people who've been certified as Phia Level 2 certified people. We're very proud of those folks.
Nice job.
And over 80 individuals here at the Phia Group have already passed Level 1 certification. Level 3 is coming up next. It's going to be impossible to pass. We're hoping for maybe 5 people. That's it. Next slide. We want to make sure we give a special shout-out. Jacqueline Cole, if you're out there, start waving your hands.
I can't see you.
Start screaming. We can't see you, but we know how excited you are. Jacqueline Cole of Sanford Health Plan, big fan, has been dialing in for a long, long time. She is going to get the infamous goodie bag. I love it when folks, Matt especially, because don't you love it when folks call us up and then ask for goodie bags? We're like, no, that's not how it works. You got to actually be a follower. You have to actually love us. You actually have to call us all the time and send letters and, whatever, post on LinkedIn how great we are. And then we're going to send you everything, backpacks, best backpacks in the industry, T-shirts, whatever you want. But again, special shout out to Jacqueline Cole of Sanford Health Plan. Next slide. This new thing that we're doing, folks, is the Faces of Phia. One of the key, and again, we picked Matt's face first because it's such a pretty face. I mean, look at Matt. I mean, he looks great, doesn't he? He looks serious. Happy, serious. But Matt is our marketing and account manager. He has been a driving force. I mean, I think Matt wrote this. Is this his own words?
Oh, yeah.
All right, well, I'm not going to read it then because I don't know how true any of it is. But we want to make sure that people know every single week we'll have a new face of Phia. These are people that you typically don't see. I'm excited for Norma next week, to be honest with you.
Me too.
But it's going to be a big piece of what we do now going forward is every single week we're going to be putting out there on the internet. We're going to put on Instagram or whatever else social media we have. You will know who the faces behind Phia, what makes this company click. Just wanted to make sure we put that out there. Okay, next. This is what we're going to talk about today. Problem, purpose, people. Last month's FAQs from PGC, which Erin will have her first foray into. By the way, folks, you don't know, Erin actually has spoken at a Phia event before. She was on our podcast earlier this week. She failed tremendously. Go on our iTunes, look up the Phia Group's podcast, and you can find Erin's podcast there. I think it'll be there next week. And you'll feel bad for her after listening to it. I mean, she didn't do it.
Oh, you did great.
You didn't do that great, but that's okay. It's actually better. I think it's better when people fail at that stuff because it makes it more interesting to listen to, right? No one wants to. People want to hear bad things.
Great.
Okay. So we're going to talk about a brief political update without Brady. We're going to talk about specialty drug trends, cost-containment strategies to deal with those pricing trends, patient assistance programs, copay cards, right to trial legislation, and also the pretty cool CVS Health's new RX program, which I think came out a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, we just touched on it.
And it's pretty innovative, and we'll see how that works and if other competitors in the marketplace will follow. So, folks, why do we do this? What is our purpose? I urge every one of you, whether you're a TPA, stop-loss carrier, broker, advisor, consultant, employer group, have a reason why your company exists. And why does Phia Group exist? Because we want to make sure that all Americans have access to high-quality, affordable health care. With that, for the first time ever, joining a Phia Group webinar, guys, she's sweating. I want everyone on the audience, the thousands of people listening, I want you all to know, I want everyone to know, she is sweating. She looks like her hands are very cold. She's shaking a little bit. So let's give a warm welcome to Erin. Erin, take it away.
I'm fine. Everything's fine.
Everything is fine.
If you can see it, you can be it, Erin.
All right.
All right,
As long as you think that, that's good.
So PGC FAQs. So the first question here, what is HIPAA's source of injury rule? So in essence, the rule prohibits group health plans from excluding a claim based on, in other words, if the illness or injury was a result of an act of domestic violence or a medical condition, whether that be mental or physical, those claims can't be excluded. So let's kind of unpack this in an example. So the plan participant is on a plan that has an illegal drugs exclusion, and the plan participant, let's say they overdose on an illegal drug. So on its face, the illegal drug exclusion would seem like it would exclude that, right? It would exclude that overdose, it would exclude that injury. So what this source of injury rule does is it might prohibit those claims from being excluded. So say this injury, say this overdose was the result of depression, of a mental health condition. So the source of injury would come in and say, no, you can't actually exclude those exclude those claims.
But I'm sorry for cutting you off there, but don't typically, like suicide, all those exclusions, except if it's a result of a medical or mental condition, isn't that already part of the deal?
Yep.
So in the typical plan doc, the source of injury, I mean, can't you make an argument that there really is nothing that's really could ever be excluded from a plan? Because couldn't you argue that some mental condition caused you to do anything that there is? Sorry for taking you off script, Erin, but that's what we do here at our webinars. Ron, what do you think?
Yeah, so the source of injury rule that came out, it did a couple things, right? One, it definitely neutered a Secondly, not only a lot of exclusions that I think it's not going to happen, but for one of these exceptions. So they pretty much got eliminated. The second thing that I think a lot of them did was it exposed a, let's say, copy-paste mentality by a lot of plan drafters. You know, we talk all the time about the fella who broke his hand after beating his wife. They tried to exclude the claims for fixing the broken hand because it was assault battery, result of an illegal act. But because the exception to the exclusion was unless it's the result of domestic violence, this guy and his attorney, they whipped that out and say, well, this was the result of domestic violence. And so it kind of exposed the fact that even though you were copy-pasting from the rule, really what you should have done is say being the victim of domestic violence. So these exceptions to the exclusions, I think, have exposed a few issues. One, weak exclusions. Two, weak plan drafting skills. So it's something that is
Good point. So about plan drafting. So the key here is to remember that this exclusion is going to apply regardless of whether it's in the plan or not. So how is this an issue? So for stop loss, say that this claim comes up and on its face, the carrier's like, hey, this claim should have been excluded. So the plan really wants to make sure that this source of injury rule is clearly outlined in their plan document so that the carrier sees, okay, now I see why this claim is being covered.
So this could be a potential reason why a stop-loss carrier could try to deny coverage on a claim. That's why it's really important to make sure that plan document is tight. Well, what percentage of our plan docs that we typically see be fine when it comes to the source of injury rule, and what percentage you think, you know what, they might need to take another look at this? I mean, is this a prevailing issue with plan design in our industry or no?
I actually think most plans have this now, and I think a lot of carriers actually in their stop loss policy as well, but it's always better to just err on the side of caution and make sure that your plan has this in there. But I think we're starting to see more and more plans are outlining this in their plan provisions. So we can move on to the next question here, which is a plan a multiple employer welfare arrangement? So when we hear the word MIWA, it creates a lot of stress, right? It involves heavy state regulations, separate filing requirements. And so is a plan a MIWA? What is a MIWA? So a MIWA is a plan that is offered to two or more employers as long as they're not a control group of trades or businesses. That's defined by the IRS. So this seems simple, right? If you're a control group, you're not going to be considered a MIWA. But if you're a plan offering to two or more employees, you're going to be seen as a MIWA if you're not a control group. So it's not that easy. So what we have seen, which has been a big issue here, is inadvertent or accidental MIWAs. So say an employer is going to offer coverage to employees of the employer and offer coverage to non-employees. So independent contractors, right? So say a plan offers coverage to their employees and independent contractors. ERISA actually says that in that instance, an accidental MIWA could be formed. So the key here is that you don't have to have intent to actually form a MIWA. So that's a problem. So if you're accidentally forming a MIWA, you're probably not going to be complying with MIWA license regulations, state regulations, filing requirements. So it's something to, the takeaway here is that there does not need to be intent to form one. It could accidentally be informed.
One of the things that we keep hearing as well, I literally had a call an hour ago with a client who was talking about, you know, I was thinking about doing a MIWA, but now I'm just going to do an association health plan. And I go, wait, you know, it depends. You might want to do an association health plan, but it still might be subject to MIWA laws depending on the state that you're in. So it's a question that keeps coming up now, I think more and more because people are looking at association health plan options for next year. But that's a great point. What's the next one? What's the next question we got?
So the next one is actually a question I got asked today, and it's about the notice requirements involved for plan changes. So for summary of material modifications and summary of material reductions, otherwise known as SMMs and SMRs. So an SMM reports changes in information that's going to change the SBD, or the summary plan description. So an example of that could be a change in deductible, an addition or deletion of coverage. And the notice requirement that goes along with that is that the plan administrator has to provide notice as soon as administratively feasible after the adoption of that SMM, but no later than within 210 days after the close of the plan year. So keep in mind that that's a post-notification requirement. That's not advance notice. So I'll get into that a little bit later. So a summary of material reduction is actually under the umbrella of a summary of material modification. So it's a type of SMM. So as the name kind of suggests, it's when there's a significant reduction in benefits. So the notice requirement for that is different. That's when a plan administrator has to notify all eligible employees as soon as administratively feasible, but no later than 60 days after the adoption of that reduction. So again, just like an SMR, that's a post-notification requirement, not an advanced notification requirement.
Are we seeing, I mean, especially in this economy, are we seeing a lot of people reduce material coverage? Are we seeing this a lot?
Well, we'll see this later on where people are looking to contain cost of specialty drugs. They're looking to exclude specialty drugs.
So all right, let's put that aside for a second. If you wanted to change, you're not changing what you cover, but maybe the way you pay the claim. So would reference-based pricing be subject to?
That would probably more fall under an SMM.
Because it's
not necessarily material reduction. It's just a different way that you're going to be.
You're modifying the way you're paying or administrating versus reducing the amount you administer.
Yes.
Great answer. Hey, you know what? Great job. I mean, she's covered in red blotches. You can see it everywhere. It's amazing. But she did great. We should have videotaped this. Yeah. We should have videotaped this one. Hey, but honestly, great job. So with that, we're going to turn it over to our good friend, Brady. Oh, I meant Ron. Sorry, Brady. Ron, I apologize. Well, we're talking about politics. We're talking about politics here. The politics of high drug prices. Ron, take it from here.
Sure. So before I go ahead and get started with the slides, I do want to address, we've gotten a few people comment about the sound. I understand that some people that are dial-in by phone are having some audio break in and out. People who are dialed in through their computer seem to be fine. Hopefully that issue is resolved. However, if it isn't, please note that the recording is run through the same audio line as the computer dial-in, not the phone dial-in. So I've been told that the recording will be flawless. So feel free to download that later just to catch anything that you might have missed during the break in and out.
And I mean, we've gotten already hundreds of comments. So please, folks, if we do not get to your question, part of it's the reason because we just don't like you, but part of it could be we just run out of time. But we will answer all questions that other people know after the webinar. We reach out to everyone and give you details and follow-up answers to your amazingly great questions.
All right.
Ron, take it away.
Getting on the topic of politics, but also the actual subject matter of today's presentation, that being drugs and specialty drugs in particular, it all goes back to what the intent is, not only from the federal government, but also the state. You look at the fact that Trump appointed Alex Azar as the secretary of HHS, and I mean, this guy is a pharmaceutical executive, so I think the writing was on the wall even then as far as what the intent was going to be. And certainly the initial salvo was against the drug manufacturers. You remember PharmaBro and the EpiPen and all that stuff, and it seemed like the drug, but more what we've seen of the focus off of the drug manufacturers and onto the PBMs. And we'll talk a little bit about how that is happening, how that is occurring, the way it's been evolving. And again, this is happening not only at the federal level, but also the state level. And I've already mentioned Mr. Azar, but he was quoted as saying something along the lines of, because the PBMs can retain a portion of the rebate at higher cost meds with larger rebates. And this leads to manufacturers raising prices. So basically, there's this attitude that there's this sort of circle of conflict of interest which results in the cost going up. And that's just one example of how the PBMs have essentially become the scapegoat, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, for the rising cost of these medications. So moving on to the next slide. I mentioned that this is happening both at the federal level and the state level. I was doing some research on it, and Adam, you may like this. One of the first things when you search regarding the attack on PBMs at the legislative level, one of the first things that come up is Ohio. And your buddies in Cleveland,
the heart of it all.
There you go. They are they're leading the charge at the state level, and basically they're doing things that are very similar to or copied off of the American Patients First, which is the Trump administration's blueprint for reducing drug costs. Again, as it relates to PBMs, one of the things that they really harp on, that they focus on, is this concept of the gag rule, which basically prevents a physician or rather a pharmacist, so the one who's at the point of sale, from telling the consumer, i.e. the patient, that the drug may actually be less expensive if they just pay for it out of pocket. It could be that your copay is actually higher when you're paying a copay and they're paying it through the plan at the PBM contracted rate. The overall cost, not only overall, but even just the copay out-of-pocket expense to the patient may be more than if they just paid the whole thing out of pocket. Currently, they're not allowed to do that. And you have some people saying that that's not true. There's nothing that stops them. Other people say it is. Regardless, these laws are targeting that quote-unquote gag rule that you hear about. Additionally, some of the other things that you hear being thrown out there regarding the American Patients First blueprint theory is a fiduciary status. Now, you know me. I love fiduciary.
We're not doing it, Ron.
We're not going to go too deep into it, but I do think that word gets thrown around a little too willy-nilly. Not a lot of people really understand what it means. But hopefully what this means as far as PBMs are concerned is that the PBM actually has a legal obligation to put its client first, their interest before the PBM's interest. And that may potentially then impact how they put the formularies together, how they utilize rebates, who actually gets the rebate, whether there's any kind of influence or conflict of interest when it comes to going for the branded high-cost drugs instead of generics and things like that. Another thing that was mentioned is the potential, and this would be crazy, I don't know how you do this, but actually disclosing list prices in the TV ads. So in case you're already feeling like these drug ads.
So at the end, when they tell you like all the side effects.
Oh yeah. It may cause death and stroke. Yep. Right. They're also gonna be like, oh, and by the way, this costs this much.
But they made it very clear that you have the disclaimer and all of these ads that this can't be that little small print disclaimer. It has to be big enough.
That's right.
That you see the.
So like an 8 font versus a 6 font.
Yeah.
Right, but of course, what I would love to see is how these drug companies, basically the price of the drug is going to be a fraction of what it is now, but then there's this new delivery cost or something like that they tack on. So I'm sure somebody's going to figure something else around it. The joy of semantics and being attorneys, right? And
actually, the secretary, Alex Azar, he compared this to how the long requirements of cars, right? You drive by a dealership and you see a list price of a car. And when do you buy a car? Every 5, 10, 15 years? But millions of Americans are going to be buying these drugs for every month, maybe, for these chronic conditions. So they're saying, why not? Because people are saying, well, why do this? Well, why not? I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, and it should shame these companies for the price tag that they're putting on them.
Shaming them.
Shame.
I think we might have to replace Brady forever.
Well, Azar was the one who threw the word perverse out there.
He's getting a little more confident.
They're a little perverted.
As the webinar goes on.
Hands are less clammy.
So, last but not least, and we're going to talk about this a lot during this presentation, so I'm not going to go into too great detail right now, but also cracking down on copay discount cards, which on its face you think sounds like a great thing, right? The copay card, that you're helping the patient. But at the same time, in reality, it has a negative effect, which is that it steers patients away from the generics. Basically, the way the PBM structures its tiered formulary, the way the plan has its step therapy, and the fact that the plan has incentives to steer people towards generics, they do so by increasing the copay that the patient pays on branded drugs. Well, when the manufacturer says, hey, I heard your plan is steering you away from our branded drug with these high copays. Listen, we got it, buddy. We'll pay the copay. Now, all of a sudden, they're steering people back to the branded drugs and, in other words, sort of nullifying the effort of the PBM and the plan.
Obviously, that's the number one reason why I try to tell people, if you have a copay at all, and the fact is that all of these drug manufacturers are incentivizing people to say, there is no copay, no out-of-pocket for you. Again, at the end of the day, unless people care about the overall cost to the plan, and not just their copay, none of this is going to change because of, misuses of copay discounts and so forth. So, good job, Ron.
So, let's talk a little bit about actual topic of the day, specialty drugs. We throw this term around, and it's interesting because the same way we throw words around like never event and, usual customary and reference-based pricing, we use these words as if there's this industry standard definition. And just like those here too, there's actually no standard definition or agreed upon definition regarding what a specialty drug is, just sort of a general agreement or understanding regarding what a specialty drug is. And so the hallmarks that we tend to add to them are, one, they cost a lot. That's why we're having this conference call, right? Two, they're difficult to administer. That's something that people forget, is that tied into the cost of the drug, there's also the cost of administration. So that's tied into it. Special handling. Again, it costs a lot because maybe it needs to be kept at a certain temperature, it can't be shaken, things like that. It's not simple to acquire. We'll talk a little bit about specialty pharmacies and where you can actually get these drugs. You can't just necessarily go down to the corner store and get it. And last but not least, it requires ongoing assessment. This is not something where your doctor says, hey, take 2 and call me in the morning. This is something where they're monitoring you to make sure it's working, whether they have to make adjustments. That constant monitoring has costs as well. Why else is it so expensive? Well, we're spending a lot on specialty drugs for a number of reasons, but in particular, I want to point out a couple. One is the aging population. Patients in their 60s are consuming 3 times the specialty drugs of patients in their 20s and 30s. So as the population ages, you're going to see more use. 2, the purpose. They're no longer just reserved for rare conditions. You know, it was one of those things where you would only see specialty drugs in those situations on, house where, oh, that's African sleeping sickness. We need a specialty drug. Now you see it being used for things like cholesterol, asthma, arthritis, of course, Hep C, right? So as the use of specialty drugs expands to things that a lot more people are suffering, you'll not, by its very nature, see more use. As a result, still only 1 to 2% of Americans are using them, but they make up more than 1/3 of the drug spend. That's crazy. Think about that. Additionally,
so the 2% or the 1%ers,
the 1%ers
are using up 50% of all drug spend in the U.S.
Between 1/3 and 50% of drug spend on a plan-by-plan basis. And when you break it down by age, when you consider that like I said, the 60 plus is using it 3 times as many, you can literally determine that your plan members that are age 60 plus are basically 0.00 whatever % of people using drugs, and yet they're making up 25% of the spend.
My favorite bullet here, and I think you should look at it real fast, is we're spending for those people that are using the specialty drugs, $52,500 is what's being spent on their treatment. They're only making $49,000.
That is correct, sir.
The drugs, what you're paying them to have that drug is more than what you're paying them to do their job. Amazing.
That's called value, You have to, where are your values, man?
So with that, let's see if we can turn back over to Erin. Erin, so what are the options? What can we do about these drug trends? And again, when we go over these, folks, I want people to realize these are all strategies. There's a bunch of strategies that people are putting together. What you can and cannot do is a separate issue. We're going to talk about different things that we're seeing, what the legality or illegality, what the what's the word I'm looking for? What the practicality is of putting some of this in place. But Erin, take it away.
All right, yeah, so the next couple of slides here are going to be cost containment strategies. So what are the solutions? I know we got a lot of questions on whether or not you can actually exclude specialty drugs.
The number one question we got was whether or not you could exclude specialty drugs from the plan.
Yes. So there's actually no rules, there's no case law, there's no regulations that say that you can't exclude specialty drugs. What that means is you can. But what are the considerations with that?
So wait, you're saying now you can.
Yes.
If I chose to right now at Phia, we can literally say we're not going to cover any specialty drugs for any of our employees.
Yes. But there's a lot of considerations that go along with that. First off, if you have a non-grandfathered plan, the ACA requires that non-grandfathered plans covered preventive services. So if any of these specialty drugs are going to be considered to be preventive, then you can't exclude those drugs.
Now, will they be considered preventive?
You have to look at the formulary.
So that's what wrong, as you just said, how it's expanding.
Correct.
That's going to tie into that it would be preventive.
Correct.
Therefore, you have to cover it. So you don't have to cover it, but depending on the symptoms and the treatment needed, it might be considered preventive by.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
Moving on, so discrimination concerns. We also got a question about this, asking about a specific specialty drug for a specific medical condition. Can we just exclude that? Or can we just exclude that medical condition?
So one condition or one drug for a condition.
Yeah, can you target that specialty drug, or can you target that medical condition that requires that specialty drug that's very expensive? So we would recommend against that because of the HIPAA's discrimination rules. So HIPAA prohibits discrimination on the basis of health factors, for example, a medical condition. So instead, actually, we just recommend that you exclude the specialty drugs altogether rather than target that one medical condition. So the next bullet point here, the timing of plan change. So that kind of goes along with the discrimination concerns here. So if you're going to, say you are going to exclude these specialty drugs, or you're going to just go ahead and exclude that one specialty drug, you're going to want to do this at the next plan renewal. You're not going to want to do this mid-plan year because that's just a presumption of discrimination. I mean, right, if you're gonna cover these specialty drugs, then mid-plan year, you're just gonna take them away. That's gonna raise some red flags. So if you are gonna do this, make sure you don't do this mid-plan year.
Hey, just so you know, we're getting a bunch of questions asking us to ask the questions. At this point in time, feel free to ask the questions, but there's no way we can pull this off in the next 25 minutes. So again, I know a lot of these people, including Scott Haas and Hobson Carroll, who are two of our favorite questioners. What do we call them, nags? What do we call these guys? They're always sending in their comments, right? We cannot give any more free legal advice for you guys. You have to actually pay some bills. We have to invoice you, okay? That's the way it's going to have to be, guys. So I'm sorry. They're going to start swearing at us in a couple of minutes. But let's keep going, Erin. What do you got?
All right. So the next bullet point, notice requirements and minimum value. So notice requirements, I don't really need to go over too much on that because I talked about that in the PGC FAQ. So this exclusion of specialty drugs, that would be considered an SMR, right? Because it's excluding and reducing a significant amount of benefits here. You're excluding all specialty drugs. So that would be an SMR, and that would follow the notice requirements that I talked about before. But what I didn't touch upon before is that, okay, you're going to follow those SMR notice requirements, right? Well, that's a post-notification requirement. And we always recommend, because of ERISA fiduciary duties, that you have an advance notice requirement. So if you are going to exclude specialty drugs, even though the requirements are a post-notification requirement, please remember that plans should follow the ERISA fiduciary duties and give an advance notice.
Good.
And so the other overlap that I wanted to touch on with notice requirements is the ACA notice requirement rules on summaries of benefits and coverage, so the SBC. There's an overlap here. So in an SBC, you have a line item for specialty drugs. So if you're going to be excluding specialty drugs, you're going to be affecting the SBC. And SBCs have their own notice requirements. That's an advanced 60-day notice. So you're going to want to make sure that you follow the SBC notice requirements as well. So real quick, to wrap that up, minimum value. So if your plan is subject to the employer mandate and you want to exclude specialty drugs, it could affect the minimum value calculations. So in turn, you could be violating the employer mandate's minimum value requirements if you exclude these drugs. So just keep that in mind, because you definitely don't want to get a penalty from the IRS.
So that's the legal stuff. Right now, we're going to get into what are some of the other actual, industry type of strategies that you could put in place. We're talking about importing drugs, et cetera. So I want to make sure we get into that too.
Yeah, so another cost containment.
Like everyone's asking about medical tourism, right? We hear this all the time. Can you go to the Cayman Islands? Can you go to Canada? Can we go to New Zealand? Like, I can tell you this, real quick, folks, we can give advisory opinions. If you have direct questions, this does not take us a long time to put some of these answers in place based on your language, based on your plan doc, your PBM contracts, your network contracts, your stop loss contracts. This is easy for us to do. We're just trying to do a big picture here. But the number one thing, I have is when I look at certain drugs and we know that it'll cost $100,000 per dosage, and I'm being told by a vendor here or there in the industry, yep, we can get that for you in the Cayman Islands for $50,000, or we can get that in Canada for you for $60,000. Two questions I have. One, is it legal to do it? And two, is it safe? Like, am I getting an ice pack and I'm like carrying this stuff in a cooler? Like, am I qualified to do that? I mean, I've seen like some TV, movies where they have like a heart and they just put it in a cooler, right? And they bring it on a helicopter.
One of the styrofoam ones. Yeah.
Right, a styrofoam box, and that's how they do it. But so if you don't mind, Erin, answer those questions for us. Like, can you do it? And if so, is it safe to do?
Yeah, so is it legal? So importing drugs from abroad is technically illegal, even for individuals doing so for personal use. However, why this is able to be done is because the FDA applies, quote, their enforcement discretion. So they very seldom seize incoming drugs or prosecute individuals when importing drugs from abroad because of these enforcement discretion rules. And I know we have a bullet point on that, so I can touch upon that a little bit later. But is it safe? So the FDA cannot really ensure safety here. Why? Because they're not going to be approving these drugs. They're not in the U.S., so there's no FDA approval. But ultimately, when you're talking about safety, you're talking about, okay, so is this country in the same tier as America? So if you're importing drugs from Canada, for example, Canada is a tier 1 country. So Canada would meet the same manufacturing and safety standards.
What are all the tier 1 countries? Do you know them all?
I'll Google it later.
Google it later, huh?
Yeah.
That's not good.
Right.
That's not good.
I think Australia is.
New Zealand is one for sure.
Australia.
I know that, and I think also Britain.
Britain.
Great Britain's one as well.
I know, yeah.
I think that's all of them.
We're talking about North America.
Right.
Mexico is not, and Canada is.
There you go.
So Mexico is not.
No.
They're being discriminated against. See? See that? Okay.
So yeah, if you're talking about safety and manufacturing standards, you're going to want to go with a country that's in the same tier as the U.S. So while
So my beloved country of Poland is not a tier 1?
I think is there something better than tier 1, Adam? Because that's where it's going to slide.
Yeah, Poland's tier 1A. Got it. All right.
All right, so we can get kind of back into the legality of this. So law on importing drugs, the FDA's enforcement discretion policy. So when we're talking about foreign drugs, there are special importation rules and what is and is not allowed in the United States. So as I said, it's technically illegal to import drugs from another country, but these non-enforcement provisions that the government has decided to apply these non-enforcement provisions to individuals. So if there's an individual, say, is going to get this drug for non-commercial use for a small dosage because they have a chronic or life-threatening disease, the government might choose to apply these non-enforcement provisions, and in most cases they will.
May choose to apply.
Most cases they will.
In most cases they will.
Yes.
But may choose. Just want to make sure.
Yep.
So there's that game there, right?
There's still that risk that you're taking on.
You know, I don't know
But
the last time.
So why do so many municipalities do a lot of this stuff?
Well, right, Adam, when was the last time you drove 55 in a 55-mile-per-hour zone?
Last night. I always drive the speed limit.
Yeah, you do. Sure. All right.
I know Ron does.
I don't think anybody on this.
It's okay. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, a lot of people do it. I know that because I know that we've advised people. There's a lot of gray area here because before I have a bunch of people telling us, we do it all the time. Right. There's discretion there, right?
Yes.
And it's very similar to, and I don't want to bring this up now, but I'm going to have to, reference-based pricing. Certain hospitals let it go for a little while, just accepting what's been sent to them. But as it gets a little bigger, they start pushing back. So I don't know if this is one of those things where, as long as not too many people are doing it, it's under the radar. But now if everyone's doing it, could they start pushing back more?
And Adam, I think you make a great point. With the hospitals and reference-based pricing, it's a private business that is looking at what point we do a cost-benefit analysis. Are we losing enough money that it makes sense to take action? Whereas here, it's more of a government political question. And if you look, and we mentioned before, at what the current agenda is, it appears that this administration is pushing for ways, they're pushing against the manufacturers. They're pushing against the prices. And so they may actually look at medical tourism and they may smile and say, we like this, and therefore they're less likely to enforce it, not more.
I also believe, and tell me where you disagree with me, Aaron, is that personal importation, if I'm personally just bringing it back in the country, it's not part of the plan. It's part of the employer expense, not the plan expense. Doesn't that create a little different opinion as well, potentially? If the way you do it, it's the employee on his own buying it?
Yeah, because then the non-enforcement provisions are really just applying to the individuals.
So if an individual is the one that's going to the Cayman Islands on vacation with his family and decides to pick up a specialty drug there and personally carry it because they're allowed to carry 3 months supply or whatever back to the States, that's something that potentially could be okay.
Yeah, I would say they would apply those there. But that brings up the other point. If you're trying to look at the legality of this, there's another approach. If the plan member, say, wants to go to another country and receive treatment or drugs and take them in that other country, that wouldn't be illegal because U.S. law wouldn't be
take them in there. So if they had a drug that you only had to take,
them.
Right? If you had a drug, you only take 3 or 4 times or twice a year.
Sure.
Just go into the other country. And again, by the way, we were right. We don't need Google here, Aaron. We got Ron Peck and Adam Russo, as well as Carolyn Grant, who nicely verified for us that I think she's one of the past winners of our. I think she did. I'm almost positive. If not, we'll have to send her a goodie bag too now.
Yeah,
great.
That,
but I think she won a goodie bag before. But the point is, she verified the country. So if I was going to New Zealand or Canada twice a year, it's a 4-hour drive. I can go there, take the drug at a Holiday Inn Express, and then come back.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep. But that leads to the next point. So say you're going to be importing drugs or you're going to be going to another country and taking those drugs or getting that treatment. Your plan has to actually allow this. Your plan needs to be extremely clear. It needs to be concise. It might have all, but they might have an international treatment exclusion that's going to create conflict and barriers. They might even have the definition of drugs says that it needs to be FDA approved. That's going to create some barriers if you're trying to cover these drugs. still could be routed through a different country and counterfeited. So it's just other safety issues you want to be concerned of. So the last one is provider liability laws. So this is kind of common sense, right? If you are importing drugs from another country and something goes wrong, there's a major side effect, that individual can't sue under medical malpractice under U.S. law. That's because it's coming from another country.
Right. Could they sue their employer, though? Incentivized, could they then sue their employer?
No.
No.
No, because that would be, there already has a policy in place with their employer, their employer plan. So they're taking on that risk when they're going to be.
I know that's a question we get a lot, right? How much liability is going to be on the employer if they incentivize, or for whatever reason, have no copay? And I try to explain it this way. You know, if you have Blue Cross Blue Shield like we do, and there's a preferred provider or network like we have, you can't sue Blue Cross and have now referring you to them, right?
Right.
So I look at it the same way.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll turn it over to Ron for the other cost containment strategies and solutions.
Again, real quick, Ron, before we do it, I want everyone to hashtag Brady Who. I think that's important for us to recognize. Hashtag Brady Who, because Aaron's just taking over. I think Brady's done.
You're doing a great
Too
job.
bad the kid's on a plane right now speaking at a conference for us, but too bad for him, he's not here.
Yep.
My apologies.
You know what?
To all the Brady fans out there.
They say in sports, you know, somebody gets injured, your job's not going to wait for you.
That's right.
So, you know, one person actually in their comment, they asked, because there's no standard definition for specialty drug, should they define what that means in a plan document if they expect to actually address specialty drugs? The answer is absolutely yes. I think, you know, Adam, you mentioned before that Jen named her son Reed, and I think that's because she wants to emphasize the importance of reading your plan document. I'm sorry. But in all seriousness, don't give me that face. In all seriousness, I think that you need to not only define it in your plan document, but then also, like we said, you are addressing specialty drugs, the drug, the medication. You're addressing cost. The question came up as to whether you can actually target it based on the expense. And we'll talk in a little bit about how CVS is actually doing that in their recent proposal. The one thing you don't want to do is focus on the condition. Again, avoid that kind of discrimination. Some other ways that people or plans look to contain the cost on specialty drugs, you know, you look at things like prior authorization, step therapy, and then most important, actually focus on where the drug is being administered. I mean, by its very nature, if you're having the drug administered at a hospital, the the cost of the bill is going to be a lot more than if it could be administered at the person's home. So if that's an option, push that. Now, regarding step therapy and actually, you know, carving out or trying to reduce the coverage or increase the cost to the patient for using a branded drug versus generic, we've already talked about how these copay cards, and we'll talk a little bit about patient assistance programs, how it's undermined that effort. So then basically the knee-jerk reaction is say, okay, well, if you're not going to allow me to incentivize generics against branded, what if I just exclude branded drugs in its entirety? And that's kind of where we've gone at this point as a result of this back and forth game that's being played with the manufacturer. Of cost containment vendors out there, they're trying to address the cost of specialty drugs. Basically, these programs are going to fall into one of two buckets, and which direction you go is going to be based on which bucket they fall into. Are they either A, identifying alternatives to the specialty drug, meaning don't take that drug, take this instead, or B, are they saying, yes, take that drug, but here's a different way to receive it? And we were talking about medical tourism. That's an example. So again, ways of receiving it. When we talk about the specialty tiers and member incentives, in cost containment through that type of step therapy. That being said, you're starting to see a lot of pushback at the legislative level. Again, we mentioned it at the federal and state level against these copay cards and these patient assistant programs. So as a result, you may actually start to see this type of step therapy.
Well, I actually I want to add something here, because I think that the companies, right, the drug manufacturers have done a great job of making the patients, the consumers, copay, the coupons. The doctors have made them aware of these. Well, I think we as an industry need to do a better job of making our employees and their dependents, our consumers, aware and a big part of that is push notification. There is technology now available. Folks, when you're at the airport, you'll get a notification to your cell phone without you having to go into an app, without you having to go into a portal. You'll get a notification specific. Well, there's a flight for, hey, we just saw that you got a script for this drug. Are you aware? Click here, and you get that drug no copay, which is going to save money for the plan. So those opportunities to pick different drugs, promoting lower cost, different types of wellness programs, can be done with better technology than just watching a commercial when you watch a Jerry Springer.
Adam, it's a great point. It's a lot like just lawmakers, right? So, for instance, if there's a crime and you increase the penalty because people are committing this crime, right? So you say, oh, let's increase the penalty and people will stop committing the crime, and it doesn't work. It's because people don't know what the penalty is. Incentives are, if you share that information with the plan members in the first place, and they understand what incentives and disincentives are there, and push notifications and technology is a great way to do that. Speaking of another effort that people are or plans are making to try and counter in the patient assistance programs is that they are taking that copay, that coupon, that payment by the pharmaceutical manufacturer, and they're not counting it against the max out-of-pocket. The legality of this is still in debate, but that doesn't change the fact that you have plans attempting this. So basically what that means is if I have a provision in my plan document and it says if you take the generic, the copay is $0, and if you take the branded, the copay is $200. And then the manufacturer says, oh yeah, well we happen to have a $200 coupon. Now the patient's thinking, well, it doesn't cost me anything to either go generic or branded, so I might as well go branded, right? So they've undermined the plan's effort to create steerage through copays. So what the plan is now doing is saying, oh yeah, well that $200 copay coupon, it may not be coming out of your pocket, but we're not going to count it against your max out-of-pocket, meaning the amount that you have to pay out of pocket before the plan picks up 100% of every bill, therefore, is now increased by that $200 coupon. So in other words, they're basically saying we're going to offset. All right, you may not be paying it out of your pocket right now, but you're going to pay it later on some other medical treatment. So the question then becomes whether or not that's actually legal. So we're going to start to see that shake out as well. So with that, I'll turn it right back over to Aaron.
And let's talk a little bit about right-to-try legislation. A couple of things I want you to make sure you answer. My whole thing is obviously explain it, but at the end of the day, I'm going to want to know two things. How will this affect plan design, if at all? And second, how will this affect stop loss, if at all? That's it.
Yeah, so I'll just start with just briefly going over the right-to-try legislation. So this law, as the slide says, this law allows terminally ill patients with physician approval to request access to experimental drugs which have completed phase 1 clinical trials. So those phase 1 clinical trials of the Food and Drug Administration's approval process. So they haven't been fully approved by the FDA yet. So just a little background, before this, the FDA actually had expanded access rules that allowed for unlicensed medications. So how is this different? So the right to try actually bypasses a lot of those FDA requirements, making it easier for these chronically and terminally ill patients to be able to get access to these drugs. So it protects manufacturers and physicians from liability from such use, meaning that to gain access to these drugs, the terminally ill patient needs to get approval from the physician, and it needs to get approval from the drug manufacturer. So the drug manufacturer actually doesn't have to grant access for this drug. So it also allows manufacturers to bill patients for the cost of the drugs. So if the manufacturer does approve of this drug, it can grant access at the actual cost of the drug and no more than that.
But that's it, the cost of the drug.
Yeah, it can't.
So isn't it now, isn't the scary part of this though that now everyone would know what it actually costs to manufacture a drug?
Yeah.
Versus what they're charging? So is that sort of the point of this, is like transparency?
Yes.
And then last but not least, all right, they can bill the patient for the cost, now it's required to make a health plan or the employer pay it.
Correct.
Yep. Yeah, so
why would they have a bill?
Yeah. So
they're not going to bill.
Yeah, and so this right to try law, I think some of the opponents of this, like Adam was saying, okay, well, the patient is going to bear the brunt of this cost. Great, I have access to it, but my plan and my insurer are not required to pay for it.
But just the cost. No upcharging. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Because it can't be that much money.
Yeah,
No.
I mean, to Adam, to your point, yeah, maybe to the drug manufacturer, it's not worth it because the chance you're going to get paid is so slim. It may not be worth it to do the bill because then you're tipping your hat and showing them what the cost is.
All right, so like we said before, and what Adam just asked was, all right, so why does this even matter for self-funded plans? Why are we so concerned with this? So self-funded plans don't have to cover these drugs. They're not required to. But some plans might want to consider covering these drugs. Why? Because they might be covering right now at 100% a treatment that might take a very long period of time, high dollar claims, when you could get access to this experimental drug that you don't have to cover at 100%, and it might even cure the patient. So just things to consider for the plan when they're figuring out if they want to cover this or not. In the long run, this could really save the plan a lot of money. And so plans that don't want to cover this, it's because of the
Even if the plan covered it, they'd be paying the cost of the drug, not the actual markup.
Yeah, and even if the plan covers it, they can put any dollar limit. It's not an essential health benefit. So if they want to put a dollar limit on it, if they want to just pay at a certain percentage, they're allowed to do that.
So long story short, because we literally have 6 minutes, this is something that plans should consider putting language in their plan document for.
Yeah, so bottom line here,
even our plan.
Yeah, so
we don't have this in our plan right now.
No, and so for the takeaway for these plans that want to cover these drugs is that the plan language is extremely important here, the benefits and the exclusions. You don't want to have a definition of a drug that requires FDA approval, because then in turn you're not really covering it in your plan. So just make sure the intent of your plan matches your plan language.
And then as ties to stop loss.
Yeah, so as for stop loss, you want to make sure that you discuss this with stop loss. So stop loss might not even want to reimburse these drugs. They might have their own experimental and investigational exclusion.
Which many do.
Yeah, which many carriers, a lot of stop loss policies that I've seen, all of them have their own E&I exclusion that might specifically say that they exclude phase 1 clinical trials, meaning that they won't reimburse them.
So again, if you want to do it, remember that it's possible there's a gap between your plan and the stop loss policy.
Yes.
Good.
I would encourage everybody to look at our previous podcast. I know a few episodes back, we actually did a pretty in-depth podcast on the right to try bill on the law when it was first passed. So if this is of interest to you, please do log in and take a look at that podcast.
Aaron, great job. Let's get over to Ron. Let's talk about CVS Health's new RX program, which was pretty big news on the out there when it came out a few weeks ago.
On the old interwebs. So here we go, lightning round, right? So I've mentioned already a few times how the focus, the crosshairs went from the drug manufacturers to the PBMs politically and from a lawmaking standpoint. And then we as payers, we followed along with them and likewise are sort of targeting the PBMs at this point. Well, the PBMs are now saying, hey, it's not our fault. We're on your side. It's the drug manufacturer that's driving the cost. And some new analysis has actually come out, and whether you want to play with the numbers or not, they say 75% of statistics are made up. That of $480 billion spent on these drugs, $23 billion or 4% went to the PBMs as profit. Meaning that even if you took the biggest PBMs and brought their profit down to zero, it's still not enough to cover the cost of what we spent on Humira alone.
Wow.
Yeah. So that, now again, whatever your feeling is on the matter, you can only start every journey with the first step. I don't care. The point is, there's a lot of money still there that the drug cost. Which, again, if you're not addressing the actual cost, you're not addressing the issue. And so PBMs, are they turning on the drug manufacturer? Well, no. Just like the lawmakers, they realize that's too big a bull to tackle. So instead, they're turning on the specialty pharmacies, and they're basically saying, hey, we need to hyper-regulate these pharmacies. Specialty pharmacies, in turn, they're turning around saying, well, it just so happens the biggest specialty pharmacies are owned by the biggest PBMs. So if you go and you target specialty pharmacies, you're kind of targeting yourself.
So, Ron, in the short amount of time we have, how is this going to affect self-funded plans?
So PPOs and PBMs, they all traditionally do the same thing, which is a one-step test, right? They basically say, hey, look, here's a benefit, here's a drug, whatever it is it covered by your plan document? If the answer is yes, end of exam, now you need to pay per the terms of our contract, not per the terms of your plan document. You just get to say what's covered, we get to say how much you're going to pay. What CVS has done here is they've created a two-step test. They ask, one, is the treatment covered? And two, if so, what do you want to do if the cost is $100,000 or more? So now they're not only asking whether it's covered, but how much you're willing to pay. Now this begs the question, when it comes to the plan document, that you address, well, what do you want to do if the drug is $100,000? Your PBM is now giving you the opportunity to make a decision. You have to explain it in your plan document. And this begs the question, if a drug is $100,000 or more, do you exclude the drug in its entirety, or do you pay up to $100,000?
As Erin mentioned earlier, you put a cap on how much you want to pay.
Exactly, because think about it this way: if you go with the former and you're just excluding it outright, if I'm a drug manufacturer and I could pick between a price of $99,000, right, or $101,000, I think I'll go with $99,000, so it's not excluded, right? And if you're the patient, your drug is $101,000. Your coworker's drug is $99,000, his is covered and yours isn't. Again, from a plan perspective, how you address this opportunity that CVS has created for you is important. They've opened the door, but the plan document is how you pass through.
But there are critics, Ron, they're talking about that 101 versus 99.
Huge issue.
Having a cutoff point.
It's a first step, but is it the right step? So one, again, we've talked about it many times, HIPAA and discrimination. You're looking at the price, but if, for instance, one health condition, routinely the drug costs $100,000 or more, and you're only denying those, in reality, are you targeting that issue, that health condition? You see it all the time with dialysis, where, yeah, you're saying we don't pay for dialysis beyond a certain price, and then they say you're targeting dialysis, but in reality, you're targeting ESRD, which is a condition.
Right.
Real quickly,
go ahead.
Sorry, we got a question about EHB concerns, and you did talk about putting dollar limits on things. So as long as these specialty drugs aren't considered under the applicable state benchmark plan, as long as that drug isn't considered essential, then you can. So for example, if infertility is considered essential, then those infertility drugs can't have dollar limits on them.
Did you see her just cut you off? That was amazing.
Honestly.
Hashtag Brady Who. That's all I got to say.
Brady Who.
Brady Who.
You know, so it's funny too, because it's one of my favorite lines in a movie, right? So in Jurassic Park, when Jeff Goldblum says, you know, you were so preoccupied whether you could, you never asked if you should. That's the issue we're having here, is that even if you can exclude it, the question is whether you should exclude it, because if you do, how's it going to make the plan look? So that's another thing to take into consideration.
We'll see more about that in 2019. So folks, check your inbox right now. Our third quarter newsletter just came out. I want to make sure you all get that. And we have run out of time. It is now 2 o'clock Eastern time. Folks, please join us on the next webinar, November 13th at 1 o'clock Eastern time. This webinar will be on our Phia Group website at 2:30 Eastern time. For those of you that had any audio issues, we promise you won't have them there. And trust me, right after this webinar is over, we will bring Matt into our office to find out what happened. But listen, for most of you, there was no issues at all. We apologize for anyone that did have any issues. On behalf of Matt, Erin, Ron, and myself, thank you. Trust me, we are humbled by the record numbers of people that have joined us today. We look forward to seeing you all next month. Happy Halloween, and have a great rest of your week. Thank you.